Picture this. It's March 1945, somewhere in the frozen plains of eastern Prussia. The war is almost over, but nobody has told the metal beast sitting abandoned in a muddy field. Its tracks are silent. Its gun, still pointed west, casts a shadow longer than most Soviet tanks are tall. Soviet infantry approach cautiously, weapons raised, expecting ambush, expecting fire. But there's nothing. Just silence. And then they see it clearly for the first time. The Panzerkampfwagen 6E Ausführung B. The Königstiger. The King Tiger. 68 tons of German engineering sitting there like a sleeping god of war. Intact. Operational. Abandoned. Before we dive into what happened next, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching this from, and if you've ever wondered why German tanks terrified entire armies but still lost the war. Because what Soviet engineers discovered inside this captured monster would change tank warfare forever. And the answer wasn't what anyone expected. Now, you have to understand something about the moment in history we're discussing. By early 1945, the Red Army had been fighting the Wehrmacht for nearly 4 years. They had seen every horror, every innovation, every desperate German gamble on the battlefield. Soviet tankers had faced Panzer IIIs, Panzerabweis, Panthers, and the original Tiger Vosser. They had learned, adapted, bled, and evolved. The T-34, their workhorse, had become a legend in its own right, a tank so practical and so producible that Soviet factories churned them out by the tens of thousands. But the King Tiger? That was different. That was something whispered about in fear around campfires. Rumors spoke of a tank that couldn't be destroyed from the front, a fortress on tracks that could annihilate entire platoons before they even got close enough to return fire. Soviet command had intelligence reports, blurry photographs, and desperate radio transmissions from units that encountered them. But they had never, until this moment, captured one fully intact. This wasn't just a battlefield prize. This was a window into the enemy's soul, a chance to understand the philosophy that drove German armor design, and perhaps most importantly, a mirror that would force the Soviets to examine their own approach to war. The tank was transported under heavy guard to the Kubinka Proving Grounds just outside Moscow. This facility was the Soviet Union's most classified testing center, a place where captured enemy equipment was dissected, analyzed, and reverse-engineered. When the King Tiger arrived on its special railway flat car, engineers, designers, and high-ranking military officials gathered like pilgrims before a shrine. Standing among them was a man named Colonel Engineer Anatoly Mikhailovich Karpov, a veteran tank designer who had worked on the T-34's development and witnessed the entire evolution of Soviet armor doctrine. Karpov was 52 years old, with graying hair and hands permanently stained with machine oil. He had grown up in a village where his father was a blacksmith, and he had learned engineering not in prestigious academies, but through apprenticeship, necessity, and the brutal teacher that is war. He spoke rarely, thought constantly, and had a reputation for seeing through propaganda to the mechanical truth beneath. While younger engineers excitedly swarmed around the King Tiger, measuring, photographing, and debating, Karpov stood back, silent, his eyes moving slowly across the IE tank's profile. He was thinking about cost, not just in rubles or Reichsmarks, but in the cost of complexity, the cost of perfection, and the cost of pride. Also present that day was Major General Dmitry Ustinov, a rising star in Soviet military procurement, a man who embodied the new generation of Soviet leadership, ambitious, ideologically rigid, and utterly convinced of Soviet superiority in all things. Ustinov was only 36 but already wielded enormous influence. He had orchestrated factory evacuations during the German invasion, supervised the mass production of the T-34, and built a reputation as a man who delivered results through sheer force of will and political maneuvering. To Ustinov, the captured King Tiger was a trophy, proof that even Germany's most advanced weapons could be defeated and claimed. He arrived at Kubinka in his immaculate uniform, flanked by aides, and immediately began issuing orders for a full technical assessment. He wanted every measurement, every specification, every secret the German designers had hidden in that steel cathedral. But more than that, he wanted validation. He wanted the engineers to confirm what he already believed, that Soviet armor was sufficient, that the T-34's design philosophy was correct, and that any advantages the Germans possessed were marginal at best. Standing beside the King Tiger, Ustinov looked at Karpov with a mixture of expectation and challenge in his eyes, as if to say, "Tell me we're winning. Tell me we were right all along." Karpov said nothing. He simply walked closer to the tank, placed his weathered hand on the cold armor plate, and felt its thickness. It was like touching a fortress wall, 180 millimeters thick on the front turret face. By comparison, the T-34's turret was 90 millimeters at best. This wasn't just superior. This was a different philosophy made metal. Ustinov, watching Karpov's silence, felt the first flicker of irritation. "Well," he demanded, his voice sharp with authority. "What do you think, Colonel Engineer? Impressive German toy, isn't it? Big, heavy, expensive. Exactly what we expected from fascist excess." Around them, younger engineers nodded eagerly, echoing their superior's sentiment. But Karpov didn't answer immediately. He walked around the tank slowly, examining the tracks, the engine compartment, the gun mantlet, the vision ports. His fingers traced the welds, assessed the quality of the steel, measured the complexity of the suspension system. Finally he spoke, his voice low and measured. "It's the most impressive tank I've ever seen, and that terrifies me." The words hung in the cold air like a confession. Ustinov's face darkened. "Explain yourself," he ordered, his tone now edged with warning. Karpov turned to face him directly, showing no deference, no political calculation. "Because if we try to copy this, Comrade General, we will lose the war. And if we don't understand why they built it this way, we'll repeat their mistakes for the next 50 years. The tension in that moment was palpable. You could feel the ideological clash, the generational divide, the fundamental disagreement about what war actually required. Ustinov stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and injured pride. "Are you suggesting Soviet engineering is inferior? Are you saying we should admire fascist design?" The younger engineers fell silent, sensing danger. In Stalin's Soviet Union, such accusations could end careers or lives. But Karpov held his ground with the calm of a man who had nothing left to prove and nothing left to fear. "I'm saying we need to understand what we're looking at before we judge it. This tank isn't just a weapon. It's a philosophy. And that philosophy is dying, even as we stand here admiring it." Ustinov's hand clenched into a fist. "Careful, Anatoly Mikhailovich. Your words sound dangerously close to defeatism." Karpov smiled slightly, the kind of smile that comes from exhaustion and clarity combined. "Not defeatism, Comrade General. Realism. Come, let me show you what I mean." What followed over the next several weeks was one of the most thorough technical examinations in military history. The Soviet engineers disassembled the King Tiger piece by piece, measuring every component, testing every system, documenting every design choice. They fired captured German shells at captured German armor to test penetration. They ran the engine until it overheated. They analyzed the metallurgy, the manufacturing tolerances, the quality control standards. And with each discovery, the picture became clearer and more complex. The King Tiger's frontal armor was indeed nearly impenetrable by standard Soviet anti-tank weapons. Its 80mm KWK-43 L-71 gun could destroy any Allied tank at ranges where return fire was impossible. Its optical sights were of such precision that Soviet engineers initially thought they were examining scientific instruments, not battlefield equipment. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Hand-fitted parts, carefully machined components, evidence of skilled labor at every level. This was a tank built not by mass production, but by artisans. But then came the other discoveries. The engine was a marvel of power, yes, but it consumed fuel at a catastrophic rate, less than 1 kilometer per liter under combat conditions. The transmission was sophisticated but fragile, prone to failure, and required specialized tools and trained mechanics to repair. The interleaved road wheel suspension, which gave the tank its smooth ride, became a frozen death trap in Russian winter, packing with mud and ice that could immobilize the vehicle for hours. And the manufacturing time? A single King Tiger required approximately 300,000 man-hours to build. By comparison, a T-34 required fewer than 3,000 man-hours. Do the math. For every King Tiger Germany produced, the Soviet Union could build 100 T-34s. Karpov compiled his findings into a detailed report. But he also did something unusual. He requested a full assembly meeting where he could present his conclusions not just to Ustinov, but to the entire design bureau, the military leadership, and representatives from Soviet tank factories. Ustinov initially resisted, sensing that Karpov's findings might contradict the prevailing narrative. But political pressure from others who had heard rumors of the report's contents forced his hand. The meeting was scheduled for late April, in a austere conference room at Kubinka, with maps on the walls and the disassembled King Tiger visible through the windows, its components laid out like the skeleton of a dinosaur. When the day came, more than 60 people filled the room. Generals, factory directors, party officials, and engineers. Ustinov sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid with defensive authority. Karpov stood at the front with a pointer, a stack of documents, and the weariness of a man about to tell uncomfortable truths. "Comrades," Karpov began, "I have spent 4 weeks examining the German Königstiger. I have measured it, tested it, broken it, and reassembled it, and I have reached a conclusion that I believe will determine whether we win not just this war, but the next one." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The King Tiger is the finest tank ever built. And that is precisely why Germany is losing." The room erupted in confused murmuring. Ustinov leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. "Explain this paradox, Colonel Engineer, before you waste any more of our time." Karpov nodded, unruffled. "The King Tiger represents the German philosophy of warfare taken to its logical extreme. The belief that technological superiority and individual excellence can overcome numerical inferiority. This tank can destroy 10 of ours before we get close enough to fire back. But they cannot build 10 of them. They can barely build one. And we can build 1,000. He clicked to the first chart, showing production figures. In 1944, Germany produced 489 King Tigers. In the same year, the Soviet Union produced 11,000 T-34s and self-propelled guns. The mathematics of attrition are inescapable. One King Tiger can kill 20 T-34s before being destroyed. But if we send 50 T-34s, 30 survive to complete the mission. We win. They lose. Not because our tank is better, but because we understand what war actually requires." Ustinov interrupted, his voice sharp with challenge. "So you're suggesting we celebrate our inferiority? That we take pride in being crude and simplistic?" This was the moment. This was the confrontation that had been building since the King Tiger first arrived. Karpov turned to face Ustinov directly, his voice calm but firm, carrying the authority of lived experience. "No, Comrade General. I'm suggesting we celebrate our wisdom. The Germans built the perfect tank for a war that doesn't exist. A war of single combat, of nightly duels, of individual heroes. They built a tank for the mythology of war, not the reality. We built a tank for the war that is brutal, industrial, unforgiving. A war won not by perfection, but by persistence." The silence in the room was absolute. Every eye moved between Karpov and Ustinov, watching the clash of philosophies play out in real time. Ustinov's face had gone pale, then red. "You speak as if you admire German engineering more than Soviet ingenuity, as if you believe their designers are superior to ours." Karpov shook his head slowly. "No, I believe their designers are more talented than ours, and I believe that is their fatal flaw." The statement was so unexpected, so counterintuitive, that even Ustinov paused, thrown off balance. "Explain," he demanded, but now his voice carried less certainty. Karpov returned to his charts. "Every King Tiger component is manufactured to tolerances tighter than a Swiss watch. Every part is unique, hand-fitted, irreplaceable. When a King Tiger breaks down in the field, which it does constantly, it cannot be repaired by a barely trained conscript with a hammer and spare parts scavenged from other tanks. It requires a trained specialist, specialized tools, and components manufactured in Germany and transported to the front. In contrast, the T-34 is deliberately designed for imperfection. Its parts are interchangeable. Its systems are simple. A farmer's son can learn to maintain it in a week, and when it breaks, and it does break, it can be repaired in a ditch. With whatever is available." He advanced to the next slide, showing photographs of King Tiger road wheels caked in frozen mud. "Look at this suspension system. Beautiful, sophisticated, provides an incredibly smooth ride, and in Russian winter it becomes a frozen prison. The interleaved wheels trap mud and snow, which freeze overnight. German crews spent hours every morning with blowtorches trying to free their vehicles. Meanwhile, the T-34's crude, simple suspension could roll through the same conditions without hesitation." One of the factory directors raised his hand. "But surely, Colonel Engineer, there are elements of the King Tiger we should incorporate. The armor protection? The gun accuracy?" Karpov nodded. "Absolutely. And we will. But selectively, intelligently, without losing sight of what makes our approach effective. The Germans made the mistake of pursuing perfection. We must pursue sufficiency with overwhelming numbers. The King Tiger's gun is devastating, yes. So we will improve our guns, but we will improve them to the point of effectiveness, not perfection. We will increase armor protection, but not to the point where it compromises mobility or production speed. We will learn from German precision, But we will never sacrifice mass production for it. Ustinov, sensing the room's mood shifting toward Karpov's perspective, tried a different attack. Your entire argument assumes we cannot match German quality while maintaining production rates. You underestimate Soviet industry, Soviet workers, Soviet ingenuity. Karpov smiled sadly, and in that smile was a lifetime of watching grand promises crash against mechanical reality. Comrade General, I spent 3 years at Factory 183 in the Urals, where we produced the T-34. I watched women and teenagers work 16-hour shifts in unheated factories, building tanks with their bare hands because we didn't have enough tools. I watched engineers design away every unnecessary component because we didn't have enough steel, enough time, enough of anything except courage and necessity. Those workers, those conditions, won this war. Not by building perfect machines, but by building enough good enough machines that the enemy drowned in them. He advanced to the final chart, showing comparative strategic mobility. The King Tiger weighs 68 tons. It cannot cross most bridges. It cannot be transported by standard rail cars. It cannot navigate soft ground without preparation. Its strategic mobility is near zero. The T-34 weighs 30 tons. It can cross rivers, navigate forests, be transported anywhere, be deployed everywhere. War isn't won by the strongest tank in ideal conditions. It's won by the tank that can actually reach the battlefield, fight, be repaired, and fight again tomorrow. The room was completely silent now, the weight of Karpov's argument settling over everyone like snow. Even Ustinov seemed to have lost his combative edge, replaced by something more complex, the painful recognition that ideology must sometimes bow to reality. But Karpov wasn't finished. He walked away from his charts and stood in the center of the room, looking at each person individually. I want to show you something else I discovered. Something that has nothing to do with specifications or production rates. He gestured to an aide, who brought forward a leather notebook, worn and stained. We found this inside the King Tiger, tucked behind the radio operator's seat. It's a diary written by the tank's commander, a Lieutenant Hans Schroeder. I had it translated. Karpov opened the notebook and his voice softened, taking on a different tone, almost intimate. February 18th, 1945. Today we received our assignment to hold the bridge at Silo. My crew is exhausted. We have been in continuous retreat for 6 weeks. This tank, this magnificent machine, is all that stands between our position and collapse. I am 23 years old, and I know I will die in this tank. Not because Soviet tanks are better, but because there are so many of them, and there is only one of me. Karpov looked up from the diary. March 3rd, 1945. Our transmission failed today. We radioed for parts. We were told there are no spare transmissions available. We were told to hold position anyway. We are a fortress that cannot move, firing at an ocean that keeps coming. I think of my younger brother, who wanted to be an engineer. I hope he never builds machines of war. There is no glory in perfection when perfection means nothing. The room had become something sacred now, a space where enemies became human and victory became complicated. Karpov closed the diary. March 11th, 1945. This is my final entry. We are out of fuel. We are out of ammunition. We have orders to abandon the tank and retreat on foot. I am leaving this diary in hopes that whoever finds this machine will understand. We did not lose because our tank was inferior. We lost because we built a tank for a gay war we wanted to fight, not the war that was. Karpov set the diary down gently. Lieutenant Schroeder surrendered 3 days later. He is currently in a POW camp near Stalingrad. He is alive, which is more than can be said for most King Tiger commanders. And do you know what he told our interrogators? He said he envied Soviet tankers. Not because the T-34 was better, but because when a T-34 was destroyed, the crew could requisition a new tank within days. When a King Tiger was destroyed, its crew was reassigned to infantry because there were no replacement tanks available. The Germans built perfection. We built resilience. They built art. We built tools. They lost. We won. The silence that followed was profound, broken finally by an unexpected voice. Ustinov stood and everyone tensed, expecting retaliation, expecting ideological condemnation. But when he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost reflective. Colonel Engineer Karpov, I came here today prepared to dismiss your findings as defeatist pessimism. I believed you would tell us the King Tiger was superior and that we should copy it. I was prepared to accuse you of lacking faith in Soviet capabilities. He paused and something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor of certainty. Instead, You have taught me something more valuable. That true superiority is not about building the strongest weapon, but about building the right weapon for the war you are fighting. And more than that, you have reminded me that our enemies are human beings, not monsters. That they too struggle with the gap between ideals and reality. Ustinov walked slowly toward Karpov, and the room held its breath. Then he extended his hand. I apologize for questioning your loyalty, Anatoly Mikhailovich. Your wisdom exceeds my authority. I would be honored if you would lead the design team for our next generation of tanks, incorporating what we have learned here, with full creative control and my complete support. Karpov stared at the extended hand for a long moment, then grasped it firmly. I accept, Comrade General, on one condition, that we build tanks not for parades or propaganda, but for the soldiers who must fight in them and the workers who must build them. We will learn from German precision, but we will never abandon Soviet practicality. The handshake between these two men represented more than personal reconciliation. It represented the resolution of a fundamental question that every military faces: the seductive pull of perfection versus the humble power of sufficiency. In the months that followed, Soviet tank design underwent a quiet revolution. The lessons learned from the King Tiger were incorporated selectively. Better guns with improved accuracy, enhanced armor protection using sloped plates to maximize effectiveness without excessive weight, improved optics and crew ergonomics. But the core philosophy remained unchanged: build tanks that could be produced quickly, repaired easily, and deployed everywhere. The result was the T-54, which became the most produced tank in human history, with nearly 100,000 units built. It was not the most powerful tank ever made. It was not the most sophisticated. But it was effective, reliable, and above all, it existed in numbers that made it strategically decisive. German engineering excellence produced 489 King Tigers. Soviet practical wisdom produced an armored fleet that defined tank warfare for half a century. Karpov continued his work at Kubinka until his retirement in 1962. He mentored a new generation of tank designers, always teaching them the same lesson: respect your enemy's excellence but never worship it. Understand that the perfect is the enemy of the good, and in war, the good in overwhelming numbers beats the perfect in scarce supply every single time. Ustinov's career also flourished. He became Minister of Defense and eventually a key figure in Soviet military policy. And in a move that surprised many who knew him, he kept a photograph on his desk throughout his career, a picture of himself and Karpov standing beside the captured King Tiger, shaking hands. Underneath, in Ustinov's handwriting, was a quote he had asked Karpov to write for him. True strength is not building the weapon you wish you could deploy, but deploying the weapon your soldiers can actually use. As for Lieutenant Hans Schroeder, he was repatriated to Germany in 1948. He became an automotive engineer for Mercedes-Benz, designing civilian vehicles. In a letter he wrote to Karpov in 1959, after learning about the diary's role in Soviet tank doctrine, he said, "I am glad my words helped prevent others from making our mistakes. We built tanks like cathedrals, monuments to our own cleverness. You built tanks like hammers, tools to accomplish a job. History proved which approach wins wars." So what does this story teach us here now in a world far removed from the frozen battlefields of 1945? It teaches us that excellence without wisdom is vanity. It teaches us that sophistication without practicality is a luxury you cannot afford when survival is at stake. It teaches us that sometimes the humble tool wielded by many hands accomplishes more than the perfect instrument held by a privileged few. In business, in technology, in life itself, we face the same choice the Germans and Soviets faced. Do we pursue perfection that only the few can access? Or do we pursue sufficiency that serves the many? Do we build for the world we wish existed, or the world that is? The King Tiger was a masterpiece, a triumph of engineering that still inspires awe in museums worldwide. But it lost. The T-34 was crude, uncomfortable, sometimes barely functional, often derided by those who preferred elegance over effectiveness, but it won. Not because it was better in any single dimension, but because it was good enough in all the dimensions that mattered, and it existed in numbers that made excellence irrelevant. Sometimes victory belongs not to the strongest, but to those wise enough to understand what strength actually means. If this story made you think differently about success, perfection, and the nature of winning, do me a favor. Hit that like button to help others find this lesson. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts on whether we're making the same mistakes today, chasing perfection when we should be embracing practical effectiveness. Share this with someone who needs to hear that good enough done consistently and at scale, beats perfect every single time. And subscribe because there are more stories like this one hidden in history, waiting to teach us that wisdom often sounds like humility, and truth sometimes looks like surrender until you understand what was actually won. The King Tiger taught the Soviets how to win, but it taught them by showing them exactly what not to do. And that might be the most valuable lesson perfection can teach, that it is not the goal but the trap. And wisdom is knowing when to walk away from the seductive shine of flawless brilliance toward the muddy reality of what actually works. Thank you for watching. Remember, the war is never won by the best weapon, but by the best strategy for deploying the weapons you can actually build, supply, and sustain. Choose sufficiency over perfection and watch how that choice changes everything. But the story doesn't end with victory parades and museum displays. There's one final chapter that rarely gets told. A post-war moment that reveals the deepest truth of this entire narrative. It's 1956, 11 years after the war's end. Alexander Yakovlev, now a celebrated hero of socialist labor and one of the Soviet Union's most decorated designers, receives an unexpected invitation. A delegation of German aeronautical engineers, former Messerschmitt employees now working to rebuild their nation's aviation industry, requests a meeting in Moscow. The Cold War is in full swing. Tensions between East and West are extreme. Many Soviet officials advise Yakovlev to refuse. Why give potential enemies any access or information? But Yakovlev, remembering the lesson that changed everything, agrees to meet them. The meeting takes place in a conference room at the Central Aerohydrodynamic Institute, the same building where the captured Bf-109 was first evaluated 14 years earlier. The German engineers arrive nervous, uncertain of their reception. Among them is Klaus Heinemann, a former Messerschmitt test pilot who had flown Bf-109s over the Eastern Front and survived the war. Heinemann had heard rumors about a captured Bf-109 influencing Soviet fighter design, but never knew the full story. As Yakovlev enters the room, the atmosphere is thick with historical weight. Former enemies, separated by ideology and recent bloodshed, now face to face. Yakovlev does something that stuns everyone present. He personally escorts the German delegation to the hangar where the captured Bf-109 still sits, preserved as a historical artifact. He walks them around the aircraft, pointing out specific design elements, explaining in detail how each feature influenced the Yak-3's development. The German engineers stand in silence, processing the revelation that their wartime work, intended to destroy the Soviet Union, had instead educated it. The irony is almost overwhelming. Heinemann, the former Luftwaffe pilot, stares at the aircraft he once flew in combat, now a teacher to his former enemies. Then Yakovlev says something that transforms the moment from historical curiosity to profound wisdom. "Gentlemen," he begins, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won understanding. "This aircraft taught me the most important lesson of my career. It taught me that knowledge has no flag, no ideology, no nationality. Truth is truth, whether it comes from friend or enemy, whether it flatters our assumptions or destroys them. You built this aircraft to defeat us. Instead, it taught us how to defeat you. But that's not a source of shame for either of us. That's the nature of human progress. We build on what came before. We learn from those who challenge us. And wisdom emerges not from victory, but from the willingness to acknowledge when someone else understood something better than we did." The tension in that hangar visibly shifts. One of the German engineers, his voice trembling slightly, asks the question that had been haunting him. "Do you hate us for what we built? For how many of your people died? Facing our aircraft?" The question hangs in the air, heavy with moral complexity. Everyone waits for Yakovlev's response. He takes a long moment before answering, choosing his words with the same precision he once used for aircraft design. "Hate?" Yakovlev repeats, considering the word. "No, I don't hate you. I hate war. I hate the ideologies that start wars. I hate the systems that force brilliant minds to create weapons instead of wonders. But you, as engineers, as designers, as people who understood aerodynamics and pursued excellence in your craft. No, I don't hate you. In fact, I'm grateful to you because your work, your excellence, forced us to become excellent ourselves. You pushed us to abandon comfortable mediocrity and achieve something we didn't know we were capable of. That's not something to hate. That's something to honor, even as we mourn the context that made it necessary." Klaus Heinemann, the former Luftwaffe pilot, steps forward. His eyes are wet. "Herr Yakovlev," he says, his Russian heavily accented but earnest. "I flew the Bf-109 over your country. I shot down Soviet aircraft. I killed your pilots, your countrymen, people fighting to defend their homes. I have lived with that burden for 11 years, wondering if those men had families, if they had children, if I robbed the world of good people for a cause that turned out to be evil. And now you tell me that the aircraft I flew, the machine I used to kill, became a tool for learning instead of just death? I don't know whether that makes it better or worse, but I know it means something. It has to mean something. Yakovlev walks over to Heinemann and in a gesture that defies all Cold War protocol and Soviet security concerns, extends his hand. It means that human beings can learn and grow even through the worst circumstances. It means that wisdom can emerge from tragedy. It means that we are not bound by the past unless we choose to be. You were a pilot following orders in a war. You didn't start. I was a designer trying to protect my people. We were both trapped in history's machinery. But now we can choose differently. Now we can be teachers instead of killers, builders instead of destroyers. The Bf-109 taught me how to make better aircraft. Let that be its legacy instead of just the death it caused. The two men shake hands and something profound occurs in that moment. A German pilot who killed Soviet aviators and a Soviet designer who created the fighter that shot down German pilots find common ground in the universal human capacity for growth, forgiveness, and transformation. The other engineers approach, and soon the entire group is examining the captured Bf-109 together, not as enemies or even former enemies, but as fellow students of aeronautical science, discussing design philosophy, sharing post-war discoveries, learning from each other the way Yakovlev learned from their wartime creation. As the meeting concludes and the German delegation prepares to leave, Heinemann turns back one final time. Thank you, he says simply. Thank you for showing me that the worst chapters of our lives can still teach wisdom to others. Thank you for proving that learning is stronger than hatred. I will carry this lesson for the rest of my days. Yakovlev nods, understanding that some lessons are so profound, they echo across decades, across borders, across the deepest human divisions. That meeting in 1956 never made it into official histories. It was too nuanced for Cold War propaganda, too humanistic for rigid ideological narratives, but the engineers who were present told the story quietly, in design bureaus and universities, to students and colleagues. The lesson spread not through official channels but through human connection. Excellence recognizes excellence, wisdom honors wisdom, and the capacity to learn from anyone, even former enemies, is the mark of true strength. Today the captured Bf-109 still exists in a Russian aviation museum, its German markings faded, its engine silent. Next to it, perfectly preserved, sits a Yak-3, the fighter born from humility and transformed into legend. The placard between them tells the technical story, specifications, combat records, historical context, but it doesn't tell the deeper truth, that these two aircraft, built by nations at war, ended up teaching the same lesson about human potential. We live in a world still divided by ideology, nationality, politics, and pride. We still encounter ideas that challenge our assumptions and people whose success makes us question our own approaches. And we still face the same choice Yakovlev faced in 1942. Defend our ego and our established methods, or embrace the humility to learn from anyone who has something to teach, regardless of where that wisdom originates. The captured Messerschmitt near Smolensk is still teaching us, still challenging us to ask, what are we defending out of genuine conviction, and what are we defending out of pride? What could we learn if we approached our rivals, our competitors, even our enemies as potential teachers, rather than threats to be dismissed? Alexander Yakovlev died in 1989, just as the Soviet Union he served was beginning its final collapse. In his last interview, given from a hospital bed, he was asked what he was most proud of in his long career. He didn't mention the dozens of aircraft he designed, the awards he received, or the battles his fighters won. Instead, he said this: "I'm most proud of the day I climbed into an enemy aircraft and admitted I had been wrong. Everything good that came after flowed from that moment of honest humility. I hope the next generation of designers, in Russia or anywhere else, learns that lesson without needing a war to teach it." So here's the final truth this story offers you. The Yak-3 exists not because Soviet engineers were brilliant, though they were. It exists not because Russian pilots were brave, though they were impossibly brave. It exists because one man had the wisdom to look at his enemy's success and ask, "What can this teach me?" instead of, "How can I discredit this?" That question, that openness, that humility in the face of uncomfortable truth, is available to every single one of us in every aspect of our lives. The next time you encounter someone doing something better than you, someone whose success challenges your methods or threatens your status, you face the same choice Yakovlev faced. You can defend your current approach, make excuses, find reasons why their success doesn't count or doesn't apply to your situation. Or you can ask the question that changes everything. What can this teach me? How can this make me better? That question is the beginning of transformation. That question is how students become masters. That question is how the captured becomes the teacher, how defeat becomes victory, how humility becomes strength. If this story reached something deep inside you, if it changed how you think about learning, growth, or the sources of wisdom, then do this. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're dedicated to finding these profound lessons hidden in history's most fascinating moments. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that asking for help isn't weakness, that admitting error isn't failure, that learning from anyone and everyone is the true mark of genius. Drop a comment telling us about a time when humility opened doors that pride had closed. Let's build a community of people who understand that the strongest position is not defensive arrogance but curious openness.